20 odd years ago, I met Mary. I was 8 years old then, a boy with profound shyness and misdemeanor, a pushover, a loner. My father, in peace may he finally find rest, was a single parent who raised me alone. I don't know much about my mother, and I don't really care to know. It was a good year when I turned 8. My father bought me an old Commodore 64, which by all standards was considered outdated at the time, while all my friends got a Nintendo Entertainment System. But I didn't mind. I loved my father. We lived in poverty, so a gift like this made my year. And as fate would have it, I learned the assembly coding language on my Commodore, which has led to my career in software development. Sorry, I'm getting a bit off track. All I mean to say is that I love my father with all my heart, from my birth until now, 3 years after his death, but I did feel envious of the children around me that had mothers. I like the warm, comforting embraces one often sees in the schoolyards from mothers picking up their children. Instead, I got a firm handshake each day after school from my father, which was often the most affection he visibly showed me. He loved me. I know that. But as an 8-year-old lonely boy, I was starved for attention. It wasn't until December of 1986 that I first saw Maria. How could I forget? It was snowing outside. My father was working late, and I had only managed to work out how to put the heating on, snuggling in my bed and pulling the blankets over me, because everyone knows that if you're enveloped by cotton, then the monsters can't touch you. My eyes drifted around the dark room. Dad should be home soon. I remember thinking, as my eyes landed on the shadow in the corner of my room. Blinking and sitting upright, I quickly adjusted my eyes. Sitting on my beanbag was a woman. Her eyes locked. She was, for all intents and purposes, beautiful. Even to my prepubescent mind. You know those World War II propaganda posters? The ones where it has the one flexing your arm, saying, "We can do it," from the UK. Or the one from New York that has a woman kneeling down and the tagline says, "Become a nurse, your country needs you." She looks like that. A flawless housewife plucked from the 1930s and deposited on my old, worn beanbag on a cold winter's eve. I was of course terrified, a stranger, in my room, when Dad wasn't home. When you were a kid, you sort of feel powerless against adults. They were a separate being far removed from a child. The silence that descended on that room was tangible, and I almost choked on it. Then, she smiled. Smiled so motherly that it almost made me lower my defenses in an instant. I hadn't heard this woman enter the house. Hell, she hadn't even been there when I got into bed. So my stupid, underdeveloped mind went to the good theory that it could latch onto. A guardian angel. Hello. I spoke, my voice barely a breath of the wind, yet she heard me all the same. Hello. She replied in her angelic voice, her smile never leaving. Best get some sleep now. And with that, she pulled out a newspaper and began reading. I didn't even question how she was reading in the dark. I was too terrified. My heart pounded. I felt death from the blood pumping, so I did the only thing I could do. I lay back down, pulled the covers over myself, and closed my eyes. Tight. So tight because I was scared that if I opened them, she would be closer to the bed, closer to me. I don't know how long I was awake for, but when my eyes fluttered open in the morning, I attempted to still my breathing. I was sweating. Fear of being under a heavy cotton blanket for 9 hours would do that to a person. I peeked out. Nothing. Just my empty room. Unloaded once more. Motherless. Once more. I carefully got out from the bed, expecting her to jump out and grab me, but she didn't. It was like she never existed, and I believed that idea. It was a nightmare, of course. How could someone sneak into the house and disappear without me realizing? I didn't tell Dad in the morning because, well, he is a hard-working man, and even as a child, I doubted he wanted to spend whatever little free time he had listening to a silly nightmare. And I was already a weird child who had a whole box of silly, fabricated stories I liked to unpack with my dad. So I forgot. And the next night I also jumped out of my skin when the woman was there again. This time, I had fallen asleep before she had time to arrive, so when I woke up and saw her in that same corner, sitting on the same beanbag, I cried. I didn't know what else to do, but this time, my father was home, and he came rushing in. And, boy, what's wrong? He looked frantic, which I'm not surprised about considering I rarely ever make a scene, even to this day. The woman, I cried, sobbing so hard I couldn't see. I couldn't see that she wasn't there anymore. Woman? He asked, sitting on the edge of my bed, his heavy weight lowering it. What are you talking about, son? Did you have a nightmare? No, I insisted. Look, I managed to compose myself enough to point out the beanbag on the floor, yet there was no one sitting there. My dad looks to the beanbag, then back to me, and now the beanbag again. He stands and gives it a kick. Looks good to me. I didn't know what to say. What can you say to convince someone in that situation? So I get him to search my room. After every nook and cranny was checked, I somehow managed to convince him to sleep in my room for the night. I barely slept. All evidence pointed to the fact that this woman wasn't real. All evidence except the slight groove on the beanbag. As you can probably imagine, she came back the next day, and the day after that, so I'll spare you the details and skip a week ahead. I'd finally gotten the courage to talk to her again. Hello? I whisper, repeating our first and only conversation. Hello? She replied, meeting my gaze and smiling. Best get some sleep now, Why are you here? I don't know why I asked that out of everything. Just waiting till it's time, dear. There was no elaboration, so I pushed. Time for what? I barely just make out her face in the darkness. Her eyes were a perfect blue, her hair blonde and put up into a bun. Her face was beautiful, flawless, and that was kind of scary. Time for you to go to sleep. Now, close those eyes, she urged in a kind way. Once again, I saw her reach to the ground and she produced a newspaper, flipping it to a page and beginning to read. I fell asleep a little easier that night. I have no idea how, with a stranger sitting in the corner of my room, but I did. The next night I got bolder. Hello? Hello. Best get some sleep now, What's your name? My name is Mary. Daniel. You know my name? Of course. What kind of mother wouldn't know her own son's name? Despite everything, a small smile appeared on my lips. I was only 8 years old when I thought maybe a guardian angel just claimed to be my mother. Naively, perhaps desperately, I believed her. You're my mom? She let out a small chuckle, melodic, calming. Well, of course I am. Why else do you think I would be here? I stood up now in bed, grinning. It was stupid of me with hindsight, but you have to understand, I was a lonely, starved of affection child. These conversations lasted a long time, and I never told my father. I got more and more comfortable around Mary, and soon enough, I wasn't even questioning it. A few weeks after introductions, I managed to gather my courage and ask, Can I have a hug, Mom? She was silent. I couldn't see her face well, as it was still dark, and she insisted to keep it that way. An answer came long after I would have liked. Of course, love. I heard the crunching of the beanbag, then a step, then another, closer and closer to my bed. It sounded off. It sounded how I imagined a baby would take its first steps. I was suddenly not too keen. The shadow now over my bed. I could finally see her up close. Her eyes looked unfocused, as if they weren't real, just marbles with a black dot painted on. Her grin was uncanny and forced. The worst thing, however, was her mouth barely moved as she spoke. Scoot over. I was a little too scared to deny Mary at this point, so I did as asked. What surprised me was, unlike my father, when she climbed into my bed, it barely sank, weightless. I felt an arm wrap around me and a hand land on my back, cold, stiff. Pulled me close to her bosom, and she smiled of nothing. At that moment, I was being hugged by a cold, stiff dummy. Yet I sank into the embrace anyway, because I wanted to believe. I so wanted to believe that this was my mother, my guardian angel. Years pass, and I honestly forget Mary's there half the time. I never told my father. He never hears me speak to her at night. Mary always asks how school went, how I'm feeling, if I'm being bullied. It felt nice. It felt good to have a mother. Even when I reached that certain age where my interests veered towards the opposite sex, she kindly explained any questions I may have had, and showed no apparent disgust or judgment at more exciting dreams. Never witnessed her show anger, hatred, sorrow, or fear. I only saw happiness and motherly love. At 13 years old, Mary had become so ingrained in my routine that it was normal for me. At 13 years old, it was also the first time I had a sleepover. My best friend Josh and I had spent weeks planning it. I never told Mary. Hell, I didn't even think about it. As I said, it was normal to me at this point. Everything went great. We did what all teenage boys having sleepovers do. Drank caffeine-riddled soda, swore and looked at old Playboy magazines, and gone into the wee hours of the morning. It wasn't until I fully got into bed that I thought about Mary. I had even replaced her beanbag with a comfy chair, something my dad never questioned. She wasn't here. Was she shy? Maybe she hadn't liked Josh. At around 5 a.m., I woke up to screaming. I shot up in bed and looked to my left, and I see Josh. She was in a sleeping bag on the floor, in tears, clambering into my bed and gripping me with what I could only describe as pure terror. Now, this was the age where such a thing would be seen and joked about as gay. So for him to climb into my bed willingly, hug me like I was his only lifeline, and bury his face into my chest was not normal. It was uncharacteristic. It was scary. What the fuck? I managed to stammer out as I heard my dad rushing down the hallway. I believe the last time he had to do that was the second night of living with Mary. It's in the closet. He continued screaming. I've never, and to this day have not, heard anyone scream like that. My eyes darted to the closet. It was closed as it always was. I only had my clothes in there. My dad blasted through the door, looking ready to fight whatever scared Josh, but he was met with an empty room, with two boys cuddling in bed. As I said, this was a different age, but my dad was real old-fashioned, so at first he looked angry. He flipped the light switch on, but then he noticed Josh crying, and I looked just as scared, and he rushed over. What's wrong, lad? He kneels down beside the bed, putting his hand on Josh's shoulder. Speak to me. After several nonsensical babbles, I finally made out the words, closet, an insect. That was it? That was what was being so dramatic about? A fucking insect? What the hell, Josh? You scared me to death. I admonished, feeling silly, angry, and a slight bit relieved. My dad, however, was a perspective man. His eyes traveled to the closet. He saw something that made him frown. His gaze flashed back to Josh. What insect did you see? Can you tell? Cricket or grasshopper, he blurts out, shaking. My father sighs, goes to the closet and opens it. Close. That was all. Just like always. Oh, it was huge. Massive. It was watching me sleep. Josh insisted. I can't remember much else of that night, since Josh was shouting and screaming so much that my house might have been mistaken for a mental asylum. Dad had called Josh's parents, who came to pick him up. He wasn't at school for the next week, and when he finally came back, he barely talked. He jumped at the slightest noise. He looked exhausted. The following night, Mary was cross. Not angry, but cross, in the way a parent talks down to a disappointed child. I can't believe you didn't give me any warning, Dad. I could have been naked, and the poor lad would get fried of his life. That meaning is obvious in hindsight. Now, I need to punish you. Close your eyes. It was strange to say the least, but I followed her instructions for reasons I still do not know. I still have a scar from where she bit me. There, she panted. Now be a good boy and get some sleep. We're close to the big day. 3 weeks after the incident, he was found dead in his bedroom, ears bleeding. His parents say that on the night he died, the sound of the crickets in the garden was overwhelming. Never before they had seen such an activity. A passing note to most, a terrifying reveal for me. The night after Josh's death, I asked Mary why she wasn't at my sleepover. Well, you don't need your old mother ruining your boys' night, do you? She laughed. Every time she laughed, it sounded more and more forced, and I had started to notice it. Yeah, but you're always here when it's just me, never when someone else is here. I'm shy, dear. I thought young boys like you don't like to have your mother near their friends. I thought it was uncool, as you say. Yeah, but not even in front of Dad. She went silent after that, as if she was attempting to come up with a reasonable answer. Listen, Daniel, your father must never know I am here. I'm not exactly supposed to be here. What do you mean, Mom? Just trust me on this one, okay? Just a few more months until it is time. Then you will see. Your 14th birthday. I have such a gift for you. I was too tired to ask more. School had been tougher lately, building up to see my GSEs, and I had just lost my best friend, Josh. Whatever. Alright. Good night. Good night, child. I love you. Her soft assurance was the last thing I heard that night. On the eve of my 14th birthday, my father sat me down. Son, he started. I think it's time that we talk about your mother. I froze. Did he know? How much did he know? What can I say? Almost 6 years of talking in secret every night to my mother. Would he think it's a betrayal? My mom? Yes. You're always too young, too wide-eyed. I could never bear to tell you. Now you are almost a man. You deserve to know. Your mother. Well, your mother committed suicide. Her name was Mary. My heart almost stopped then and there. My mother was called Mary? Suicide? Then who? She attempted to commit suicide with you in her arms. Mary, your mother, she was never a mentally all there woman, but I loved her. As love would have it, love was like that. She was odd, shy, and a bit of a tomboy. Beautiful, gorgeous, red hair, green eyes, and son. If you saw those tits. He laughed. My dad was always like this. He never held back on crude jokes in front of me. But right now, I couldn't focus on his joke. My mind was filled with the image of the stranger. The woman my dad was describing was not Mary. But yeah, a bit of a loony. Mary's own mother, your Nana, said it just happened one day. She broke. I don't know what caused her to snap, but one day, while I was working, she crawled into the laundry chute of our old home. Victorian. Very nice place. Anyway, she crawled in, you in her arms. She blocked both exits, doused you and herself in petrol, and lit a spark. Always a miracle, I said. God's child you were. Barely a scratch on you when the firemen sifted through the ashes and rubble. But it's weird. They say they found you in the walls. How a baby could crawl out of a barricade, laundry chute, and into the walls always baffled everyone that worked on the case. But who was I to care? My boy survived. I did. Finishing his tale. Started drugs all on you tonight, but I never talked about her. Well, because I never forgave her for trying to take you with her. Stupid fucking bug. I was snapped out of my daze in that statement. It was so out of nowhere. Bug? I whispered. Oh yeah. Cricket, I think? Your mother hated him. With a passion. She was always rambling on about crickets. She had books on them. One thing that stuck out to me was Mary was certain they would come for you. Always slept with you in her arms, looking out for those crickets, never leaving you alone. He finished bitterly, obviously concluding that it was a product of her mental illness, but to me it was a fact. My mother had tried to protect me from the crickets. Josh screamed because he saw a cricket. I don't have a grandfather on my mom's side. My mom was raised by a single parent, just like me, susceptible to loneliness, perfect for someone to step in and take the role. I rarely thanked my dad before I was rushed to my room. I tore the place apart, starting with a closet. Nothing. Under my bed. Nothing. I ripped through boxes and threw out the old action figures in the search. The search for Mary. 5 years of my life. A lie. Sleeping in the same room as a manipulator that put up the facade of a motherly figure. Took advantage of my weakness. I wanted to fall to my knees and cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curl up and die. In a moment of clarity, I was attempting to think rationally. I never saw her leave. I never saw her enter. She is a tangible being, as I have hugged her many times, so she must be somewhere in here. It wasn't until out of admittingly pathetic anger that I kicked the closet wall that the lower panel of the wood fell off. A small passage, uneven and rough, man-made. Attempting to quell all fear before I lost my nerve, I dropped to the ground, poking my head inside. Nothing but darkness. Fuck this. Dad! I shouted, already getting my flashlight. I got on all fours and forced myself through the squeeze. Rocks, dust, and splintered wood nipped at me, but I was already waist deep when I heard my father behind me. What the? Are you shitting me? I felt him grab my ankle. Get out of there, boy. But I ignored him. He was my backup. I had to see this for myself. I didn't know who Mary was. I crawled and crawled, my legs disappearing into the hole. Yet, I felt something being tied around my ankle. Rope. Just in case. I ain't losing you. My dad vowed. He knew I was like him at the end of the day. Stubborn. He knew he wasn't getting me out of that passage. So he did all he could do to make sure I could make my own way back. I was kicking and punching at the wall, attempting to make the hole bigger. To say it was hard to breathe would be an understatement. I could barely see anything, and the passage just got tighter and tighter. It hugged my body, it crushed my chest, and I felt every single ridge as I passed them. And then I felt it. Rubbery. Cold. I looked down, struggling to move my body, putting the flashlight in my mouth, pointing it towards the source, and I almost screamed. I swear my heart stopped beating for a fleeting moment. It was skin. Not dry skin, not cut skin, but skin. Flesh. Like a costume, hollow and empty, and it bore Mary's face, Mary's body. I will admit, I threw up. There was no blood or anything, but seeing something like that is just wrong. It's not right. It was so rough and wrinkled, and it felt like I was touching a puncher at football. I only took my eyes off it when I heard the slightest of movement. At that moment, my ears were at full alert. It was in front of me, a huge, long leg speckled with hair. It jolted back into the darkness when I stole my flashlight upon it. Not yet, not yet, not ready. The voice was awful, inhuman and chittery, like I had been through a filter several times and played through a cheap speaker, each click and chirp audible behind the syllables, but it didn't come from the direction of the chitinous leg. It came from the flesh costume. Its mouth didn't move, but it continued to make noise. Out, out, not ready. I was starting to feel a bit dizzy, and my lack of reaction caused my dad to start pulling at the rope. I didn't resist, just watched in horror as the two shiny back orbs that watched me go. Fire was the only word I could muster when I was met with my father's face. To his credit, he did not hesitate. He rushed out of the room as my eyes remained on the passage. I expected something unspeakable to crawl out, the same unspeakable thing that had been wearing a woman's fleshy skin and watching me sleep each night, the thing that hugged me, the thing that told me everything would be okay. But nothing came. Dad was back in an instant. A bundle of clothes, a can of lighter fluid, and a lighter. He doused the clothes, shoved them as deep in the hole as they would go, and set them alight. We opened all the windows so we wouldn't get smoked out, then waited, watched. Silence. Then screaming. Such horrific and inhuman screaming. It sounded like one of those old cowboy movies when the Native Americans slap their mouths and empty their lungs. A sound that still pierces my ears when I think of it. No matter what shape the thing in the walls took, it was not of this world. Nothing that could make such a noise could be. Then silence one more. Quickly called the fire brigade. They arrived and put out the fire. After some stern warnings not to start fires for no reason, a firefighter had a look inside the passage. He came out in tears. He came out, a changed man. It wasn't long until people in suits showed up. One of them, an older woman, took me aside and asked me my story. I wasn't certain what was related, so I just told her everything. And she wrote it all down, said sorry, and left. Our house was then declared contaminated, and I never saw it again. We were given a heavy reimbursement, don't get me wrong, and we no longer lived in poverty. My father, God bless his soul, never asked me what I saw, never asked me why he set a fire. He just warned to move on, and he lived a good life. We lived a good life. Now I'm sure you are all wondering why I write this now. I'd honestly suppressed the memory. It wasn't until I was lying awake at night, having forgotten to take my meds, that a random thought hit me. Something so left field that I scared myself with the thought. My mother. Crickets? She was affected by the same creature, or a creature like it, and she knew it might come back one day. What it did to her on her 14th birthday, I struggled to repeat. I found her diary when Dad died, and I went through his stuff. Just like me, my mother had a guest that night, but it wasn't Mary. It was a man named Joseph, and he claimed to be her father. I read through the diary. The similarities terrify. There was an entry for several weeks after December 9th, the eve of her 14th birthday. Come January 17th, her handwriting had changed. Shaky, but barely legible. The thing she wrote was an expression of relief that she was no longer visited by Joseph. Then was a confession, closure. Most of it made no sense, but from what I can gather, Joseph, or that thing that inhabited his body, waited to surprise her on the night of her birthday. It shed its human skin and somehow impregnated her. Not by rape, mind you, but I have no idea how it works. There were pages describing how it threw up insects into her mouth, how it dug its horrible legs into her arms and held her down as it whispered sweet words into her ear. It was so loud, Mary went temporarily deaf. After hours it was done, leaving my mother a shaking mess on her bed, which was now crawling with crickets and stained with mucus. There was no sexual act performed that night, but I think at that point my mother wished it had been so simple, that she was raped, a terrible, terrible thing, but explainable, tangible. Or that night was not. A few months later she described throwing up constantly, until eventually a large, fat maggot, the size of a forearm, slithered out of her throat and moved out of sight, never to be seen again. But my mother was terrified that she would see it again, that she would see Joseph again. I learned I was a product of a one-night stand, a drunken haze in which my mother longed to feel anything other than violated. I also learned that she had attempted to miscarry, something she never told my father. When I was born, she hesitated, a child, a real being, made from two humans. And she was happy for the first time in years. She loved me. I was her world, and it was for that reason she attempted to kill me. She heard the thing, Mary, crawling the walls. The last diary entry explains how she walked in on it, cradling me like a mother in its disgusting insect arms before it scurried off out the window. She was trying to save me from the same fate. And Josh, a poor innocent boy, was killed merely because he caught a glimpse of its true form. Killed because of me. I read this. because I realized it all too late. I thought it a nightmare from my childhood would never have to relive. I need help. I need advice because my beautiful daughter turns 8 next month and mentioned in passing about the woman that watches her sleep.